identifying the policy and legal landscape, including the administrative, programmatic, technical, and data collection strategies, priorities, and methodologies that complicate the executive administration's efforts in effectively implementing these initiatives in a manner that reflects the interests of the Navajo Nation and her citizens in other jurisdictions. So these are a number of recommendations that we have been able to put together and really glean from and are informed from the community itself. And with that, I'll hand the time back over to Delegate Prade Shinata. Thank you.
Oh, for that, I do want to check if Donovan was able to get on the line with us, and if so, if he wanted to provide any recommendations or suggestions before we move forward. Okay, he wasn't able to make it on, but Donovan is part of our team as a surviving family member who wants to continue to advocate for wraparound services for families who are not receiving adequate resources when that there's a crime committed, and in terms of also dealing with the judicial system, the federal system, in one point, especially when an individual and a relative is murdered. We spoke about this at the USAO tribal consultation, that there's a real need to provide wraparound services for the families that need continued support and resources after the case is finalized, but are still suffering with the loss of their loved ones. So with that in mind, I wanted to defer some time to Shade Hope MacDonald Lone Tree, who's helping guiding this effort and providing mentorship as we work with our federal partners. Ms. MacDonald Lone Tree?
Yeah, Shadeja, appreciate that. And I am very, very, very happy that Jolene and Moroni were able to join us today. Those were fantastic presentations, and I greatly appreciate all the work that you are doing. I just wanted to give you, those who are on the call and the WebEx today, when I first started working with this initiative, there really is, as a person coming from the outside of this effort, there really was no information on missing persons on Navajo. And number one. Number two is we don't get a lot of information about the violent crime that is occurring across Navajo, meaning enough press releases on the violent crimes that are happening on Navajo. But let me go back to number one, the missing persons. I really, as a person coming from the outside, did not see any kind of public information regarding missing persons on Navajo. And so if you look at it from that angle, and we don't get enough information from our police department, from other resources to know exactly how many people are missing on a given day across the Navajo Nation. And so at that time, I thought, well, maybe we have a handful of people who are missing over the past few years. And it wasn't until I saw the work that Mesky was doing on social media that I realized how many Navajos and how many families are looking for their loved ones. And it was being posted on Facebook, on Mesky's Facebook page. And that was really, some days it was every day, some days it was every other day, but we have a number of families who are missing their loved ones. And I can't imagine, and I'm learning more and more as we work through this initiative on Navajo, but to not have not just have a location to see who is missing on Navajo, but for those families to know they don't have a resource. There's not one agency that is able to provide them the support that they need to find their loved one, to get the word out and to really help with services that the family needs and is experiencing during this time. It is very, very heartbreaking to watch and see and hear these stories from families who are suffering every day because they have a missing loved one. So that really goes directly to the development of a data center to show exactly what we're looking at across the Navajo Nation, but also to provide the support to these families who have missing loved ones. And so if you look at the normal databases, you're not going to see the same numbers that Mesky has because of, of the families who are looking for their loved ones, and they're able to post it on that page on a regular basis. And so I'm very thankful that we have a volunteer group who decided that this was urgent enough to start a grassroots initiative to start doing this. But I'm ever so grateful that Delegate Crotty has been able to take the lead and really help bring this not just to a local, but regional and national level for not just Navajo Nation, but other tribes as well. So I just wanted to make that point because if you call the local police department, maybe even a sheriff's office who borders Navajo, and ask them for data, you're not going to see anything close to what we are seeing for the families on social media and those who are actually looking for their loved ones. I'm sure there are more because not everyone has access to social media on the Navajo Nation. So I wanted to stress that point because if you extract information from one agency, you're not going to get an accurate picture of what we are facing on the Navajo Nation and how we need help. We are also, I want you to know that we are working on prevention efforts. And how is it that we are partnering with our federal partners on online safety? And how are we protecting our children, our young people when they go online and connecting with strangers? As a helicopter mom, I know that we keep close tabs on my children, but there are many families who don't know the dangers of online. They think, well, if my child is learning from home, they're safer than anything because they're in the home. But if the parents are not careful and the children are not knowing, they may come upon sites that are not safe. They may meet individuals who are dangerous. And I just saw the other day on the FBI Facebook page that they had resources for families and children who come upon dangerous websites in regards to child exploitation. And there were ways to deal with it with the trauma. We need more of those kinds of resources. And if our federal partners have those, then we need to have them on Navajo. We are working through the leadership of Delegate Crotty with our education department, as well as our health department, on various ways that we're reaching children who are at risk, and education and awareness on the dangers of being on the internet. So I just wanted to leave you with those few thoughts as well, and I'll be happy to chime in a little bit later, but I thank you again for taking the time to meet with us. Operation Lady Justice has been so important to the work that we're doing, so thank you very much.
Thank you. So this is the work collectively that has been, through prayers, ceremony, coming together and having the hard conversations and looking at the realities of what's happening in our community and who is missing and how we've normalized violence. And so what we come together as we want to heal. We want to heal by recovering our missing relatives. We want to continue to protect our children. And so as we end on this part of the listening session, I would like to ask our federal partners what then is the plan, or how can we address the implementation of Savannah Act and Not Invisible Act task force. I understand that we are in transition, but the work continues. We still have relatives throughout COVID relatives throughout this transition time that will still need our services. And so we are committed as ever to make sure that we can recommend and have family members who are on the task force who can speak to the jurisdictional issues when there is a relative who lives maybe in the county adjacent to Navajo Nation, and the challenges that they've had to deal with jurisdiction on who makes the police report, and then at one point, is there any relief from our federal partners, especially when it comes to cold cases? So if I could ask those two questions, since we have all of our federal partners, the team on the line, and understanding that there are a database available. Um, we're familiar with NAMIS, NCIS, TAP, and now what we want to see is how can we collectively get reports from those different entities so that we could have a baseline of what's happening here on Navajo. And as we move forward, that we know that we are doing the prevention work to prevent violence in our community. So I'll turn the time back over to Ms. Sweeney or Ms. Sullivan. Thank you, Ahihat.
So I think, and Jeannie Hovland, this is Katie, and so Jeannie Hovland may be able to talk about more, but one of the things that we're doing is education and outreach. NAMIS continues to be obviously available and running. I've been briefed on it as recently as last week from the National Institute of Justice, who holds the contract for NAMIS. So I think it's as much of a educational and outreach issue. NAMIS is working. We also are trying to make sure, and Jay Greenberg is great on this. We're also working to make sure that all systems are talking to each other, which is important, and all issues, CGIS and our TAP system and our, all of the different information systems are talking to each other, which is very important in order to get the best, not only the best data, but the best forensic information that we can. And then finally, I always like to remind everybody that Ashanti's Law was passed, and that is not particular to Native American communities, but it is mandated that all the states become compliant with an Ashanti alert for missing adults. And those missing adults, there are certain criterion that they have to meet. There's certain, anyone who is wanting to get away because they're in an abusive relationship or, they're being trafficked or something like that. We certainly don't want to put them in a compromising situation, but for adults who just legitimately go missing, we want to make sure that those alerts are out and everyone is looking at them kind of like an amber alert or a silver alert. And that is what this legislation that was passed and signed by the president, that is what is passed and signed by the president a couple of, I think it was 2018. So states are now starting to implement the Ashanti alert. So I hope that answers your question. It's probably a little more information than you were seeking. And Jay Greenberg, I don't know if you're still on the line, if you have something to add from your end, or Jeannie Hovland about the outreach on NAMIS.
Hey, Katie, Jay Greenberg from the FBI. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks to everybody from Navajo Nation. Before I address your specific question that you asked, I do just want to take a minute and thank you for sharing your perspectives with us. As we've seen over the last year through multiple listening sessions that we've done on the national level that amplify the messages that we do through each one of our field offices, we hear stories very similar to yours and perspectives similar to yours, and we are working very hard to address all the issues that have arisen in the multiple listening sessions that we've had nationally as well as the local ones. So a couple of points that you raised. And I'd like to tell you the optic I look through when I address all of this. So one is professionally, obviously, I sit on top of our violent crime program nationwide. That entails both all acts of violence against other humans, where we have jurisdiction or where we share concurrent jurisdiction. It also has our violent crimes against children program nationally and internationally. So I looked through both of those lenses, and then personally, as a helicopter parent for several young men, I share all of your concerns as parents. So those are sort of the two lenses that I always look through. So first on data, just to build on what Katie said, we're working very hard to figure out what kind of back-end data opportunities exist out there to make NCIC better at tracking all of the Native specific issues that we see nationwide. That is something that we are working through the governance board as we speak right now to work on. In terms of cold cases, we are partnered with BIA, with all their regional offices who are the lead on the cold case initiative pieces of both the task force as well as there was a mention of the Non-Invisible Act and Savannah's Act. And so we're working to address the data issues, the investigation issues, as well as the cold case issues that come with both those pieces of legislation. And in terms of cold cases, they're very similar to how we approach our support of all of the Native communities across the nation where we have jurisdiction, which is if there is a crime that has been committed, we will not close investigations across the board in any way, shape, or form until we've either exhausted everything that we can or until we have found the perpetrator and been able to collect all the available evidence to inform a prosecutive decision. So in terms of the cold cases, I know the BIA will be putting out some additional guidance in concert with us as time passes on what cases will rise to those levels. I will defer to anybody on from Interior who wants to talk about that process since they are the lead, but we certainly stand shoulder to shoulder with them and just want everybody in the various nations to hear that any murdered person, any person who is missing where we believe that there was a criminal offense that led to that, we will turn over every stone and we will not rest until we have an answer on what has happened in each one of those cases. Thank you.
This is Marcia. I think Jason ONeal can speak a little bit also from BIA OJF about some of the issues that Jay was just talking about. Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. But thank you, Marcia. And I'd like to echo what Jay said about thanking everyone on the call for excellent presentation. In fact, while we were on the call, I was able to identify the team's website and share that with our cold case investigative lead, and was feverishly taking notes, some incredible recommendations. Some of the notes that I took down that are things we have already been able to work on and accomplish that I wanted to highlight, especially on our NamUs initiative and the establishment of new tribal data fields. And some of those fields that have been added was the missing person last seen on tribal land, was the missing person's primary residence on tribal land, was the person enrolled or affiliated with the state or federally recognized tribe, and if yes, making an available pre-populated pick list, and then additionally, was the person deceased on tribal land, found deceased on tribal land. And as the presentation was going on, I did check a couple of the NamUs entries and confirm that that those were on there. From a cold case team perspective, as Jay mentioned, we are partnered with the FBI and other federal partners. We also plan to partner with our tribal coalitions, our tribal law enforcement offices, as well as our state and local partners as well, as we continue to develop the cold case teams. Those cold case teams right now are finalizing the protocols for the intake and staffing of those cases. With extremely limited resources throughout the country, we are going to lean very heavily on support from our other federal and state, local, and tribal partners for those investigations, and hope to make this a continuing priority moving forward.
Marcia?
Yes.
Hi, this is Laura from OVW. in anticipation of Savannah's Act and Invisible Act passing at OVW, we have been incorporating the requirements of those two bills that applied to OVW in our consultation, our annual government-to-government consultation, as well as our grant programs that the two bills apply to. And so we have been incorporating those requirements in both of those two situations for the last few years. And so we are collecting the data that is required by Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act. And we also incorporated the discussion in our government-to-government consultation this year.
Wonderful. Thanks, Laura. Jeannie, Commissioner Hovland, would you want to talk a little bit about some of the prevention intervention efforts that the task force has been discussing and that is kind of in your lane?
Sure, absolutely. And Madakayapi Chantewash Dana Page Yuzapi. Good afternoon, relatives. I greet you, or good morning, with a good heart. And I just want to reiterate, and I said this when I was on the Navajo Nation last week, the amazing work that is taking place and the examples that you're setting across Indian country and our communities on really addressing this issue from the community level, grassroots, families. Thank you for the work that you're doing. And I too was fiercely taking notes today. So we are benefiting from this and appreciate this opportunity. And I shared last week that the Administration for Children and Families, we did issue our framework on missing and murdered Native Americans to help support families, communities, individuals that have fallen victim to either going missing or being murdered, and looking at this through the prevention as well as intervention and healing. So that is available. Again, this framework is meant to be driven from the communities, and at ACF, we have programs and services for runaway homeless youth, victims and families of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. You know, as we heard a lot, violence is really the major underlying factor when we're talking about this crisis. So we are ready to partner with tribal communities, with programs to let you know what services are available at ACF, to talk about these issues with you as the communities identify what the priorities are. And if we don't have the subject matter experts, we have had some conversations in South Dakota and Alaska and reached out to Office of Justice Services, Department of Justice, HUD. So we're willing to definitely support you and your communities on having discussions on how we can prevent, how we can provide services to families and survivors and communities that are traumatized and affected by this, and recognizing in our framework to address trauma, historical and modern day trauma. So happy to send that information along. We will continue to do community outreach and education through Operation Lady Justice, and we'll continue to do this across ACF, and we're expanding it to HHS to include other program offices within the Department of Health and Human Services. So a lot of information, a lot more I'd love to share, but I know we're limited on time, and it's really important that we continue to hear from you. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
And this is Marcia. I just wanted to kind of fill in a little bit about Savannah's Act and the Not Invisible Act, and being able to make sure that we're all coordinating with those two new pieces of legislation that have been signed. So there are things within each of those bills, especially Savannah's Act, that are already being accomplished by the work of the task force and by the executive order. And so within each of our agencies right now, we're looking at what are new requirements, what are requirements that we're already doing, what things do we need to expand on, what other agencies might be involved, and then we'll be coming together to make sure that we're coordinating across, the Attorney General's initiative, across Operation Lady Justice, these two new bills, and across HHS's ANA, their framework, so that all the federal folks are working in concert together, and we're making sure we're not either missing any of the pieces of the legislation that need to be done or reinventing something that's already been done. So that process is in place right now, and we'll continue to be working on that. I do have one question that I was hoping that somebody could answer for me, and that is on the data collection piece. I'm curious as to what data that you would believe would be really helpful for you to have, not necessarily from what source, but what are the numbers, what are the data you think would be helpful for you to have in hand to kind of work backwards towards, you know, solving the problem that's actually out there? Is that something that one of you could maybe speak to briefly?
Thank you for the question. So I could start off with most importantly is we see a lot of you know, NamUs after 2018 and initiating the tribal affiliation. That was helpful, but we still need to backtrack for all of those missing persons. Our files go back to 1951, and it's not clear if NamUs or what is the scope or capacity of NamUs to identify those individuals. The other area in terms of data that we are looking at, recognizing that a large amount of our Navajo relatives go missing off the Navajo Nation, but are in close border town proximities, is understanding then how they're collecting their data, especially so like city of Gallup, Farmington, Flagstaff, Winslow, Holbrook, Page. We've talked with Flagstaff police chief, and he's trained us on how they do their missing, how they implement when there's a missing person, but it's still not clear then how we can access that data and where's a way for them to give us that information. One of the ways that has been thought about is similar, well, while it's not perfect, is how tribes are notified when there's a child in custody for an ICWA, covered under ICWA. We would want to see something similar when there's a Navajo relative who is a victim of violence or is reported missing, and that notification be given to the Navajo Nation. And we're building up a structure here internally that can, that could be that central location to receive that information. So that would be helpful. And as we would want to see something similar intersects with human trafficking or other cases. We are working with our urban Indian centers and others who provide social services, especially for our unsheltered relatives, additional training, and so that they understand the dynamic of what happens when there's someone who is missing. And if there's a way for our unsheltered relatives to stay in communication or have a way to check in, if it's just a wellness check, a check-in, so that we know that they're okay. And we also are looking at how when someone was first reported missing and were they ultimately found murdered or not with us anymore. And so we're looking at all of these cross sections of data. So I don't know if Jolene, Moroni, if the team has any other suggestions in terms of data, but we would request a training on the TAP system so that we could understand what we can start inputting so that we have a clear idea of what's being reported to our federal partners, and then what information is out there to help us understand this dynamic, to do the prevention and to do the recovery and the wraparound service. Thank you.
One thing I would like to see, I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Is like a pinpointed map of where our relatives are going missing, like potential hotspots, so that we can relay that to the public. That, you know, like for example, I know that Farmington, New Mexico and Gallup, New Mexico are the #1 hotspots for our missing Indigenous people. We do have so many missing persons cases currently right now in Gallup and in Farmington. And those seem to be the potential hotspots. So it'd be really nice to try and collect that data so that there could be a pinpoint map for us to view. Thank you.
This is Moroni with Restoring Ancestral Winds and with Delegate Crotty. I'm one of the things that when we're looking at data and databases is we constantly are sort of pushing up against that what Indigenous people now in the U.S. called asterisk nation, meaning that the sampling strategy and methodology often used by federal agencies to collect data with hard to reach populations like the Navajo Nation, there's not enough effort or funding to actually support effective research for hard to reach populations. Oftentimes that's just glossed over. I know the National Institutes of Justice have tried, but they have deferred. They have chosen not to invest in hard to reach population methodologies. And so if we're really talking about data, one of the things is maybe perhaps taking a look at all existing data sets and culling and mining through it to see what was collected for Indigenous communities, because oftentimes that's not reported. It'll say at the bottom that sample size is too small to report. I'm like, well, we would like to see what's in there. So if there's a way to go through DOJ database existing data sets and to mine what's happening with just specifically Navajo Nation, so we have an idea of like what's happening over time, right? Because right now we're going to start collecting data and it's at this point, but we have an idea. And I know that there may be indicators with existing data sets for other years that have collected data around the Navajo Nation. And it'd be nice to have that. If we're talking about what sort of data we want, that's what we want. Is to sort of take a look at what's already there. And so you would need a very specific sort of a data scientist to be able to mine that type of data. And then really just investing in methodology for hard to reach populations and operationalizing specific variable constructs that are necessary for reporting and for understanding the scope conditions. Because right now we don't really know what exists in these existing data sets except for those specific studies that target Indigenous populations. But we know the data sets include some information about Indigenous communities under the sample size is too small to report. So we would like to know more about that.
Okay, sounds good. Well, I know we're getting to the end of our time and there's people who need to log off for additional meetings. So if we could just quickly go through, Katie, is there anything you'd like to say in closing? I know that you're one of the people who needs to be able to get off.
No, this has been amazing and so enlightening, and the direct requests that you guys have talked about, we will most definitely follow up with. And I think also I just want to commend you on the great work that you're doing as a task force, as a group. And I think that this is really incredible, and I appreciate so much your time. And thank you very much. And thanks to Operation Lady Justice and my co-chair, Assistant Secretary Sweeney. Thank you.
Marcia, this is Tara. I want to echo what Katie said. There's been some tremendous work done by Navajo and kind of leading the effort as a model for other localized efforts. And I appreciate the recommendations that were shared, and I would encourage those that are on the phone or online listening to submit that information to Marcia. While the actions that are being recommended may be outside of the scope of the work that was mandated by the president, there is still room for Operation Lady Justice to provide this information in the final report as recommendations. And there are some really good ones that I heard this morning. The need for research on historical trauma and how it is linked to this epidemic. This crisis, and the need for a victim-centered healing, a healing center is something that we've heard through the listening sessions and consultations that there's a need for wraparound services and for the victims and families once there is a resolution to whatever cases may be pending. And then looking at the historical trauma-informed training, again, that is a suggestion that has come up through various discussions and conversations. And so we continue to hear these types of recommendations from being echoed across Indian country. And so I would encourage those that have provided information today to submit that in written format to Marcia Good, so that we can consider all of the information in its entirety as we continue to prepare the report for the president this year and the recommendations for the president next year. I appreciate the time and the effort put forward this morning to share this information with the task force and to know that I continue to extend my hand in partnership as the Department of the Interior co-chair designee to Navajo, to Indian country as we continue to work on this crisis together. Thank you.
I think we'll now turn it back over to Delegate Crotty. If you could close us out, that would be wonderful.
Oh, yeah, thank you very much. So I think in terms of next steps, if Operation Lady Justice can let us know when we can come back together for the markups on the report, we will submit a written, our written recommendations, and that would go through the Navajo Nation Council for their approval, and we'll submit it to your office. And if you could provide any links or resources that were mentioned, so as we build up our resource page, we can add it onto our missing and murdered and their relatives webpage. Again, this is a lot of this work is through volunteer work or coordination, and so I'd like to thank the team, and most importantly, our Navajo relatives, the families who have entrusted us with their stories. Every member on this team has been impacted by a missing relative. We've been in search teams looking for them. Notwithstanding the weather, we've paid for search dogs, we've paid for equipment, and so we want to honor those stories and continue to advocate for them. So please let us know when we'll have a chance to provide some suggestions to the recommendation, and I will submit our response to the HHS MMNA report. I think it's something that is very problematic with me is when in the framing paper and in that report, when it mentions that a missing person is not a crime. Here on Navajo Nation, when a child is missing, that's a criminal activity. And so if we can refine that statement so that we can continue to work with law enforcement and continue to interweave the prevention, the education, and restoring our families. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for everybody being on today. We've just learned an immense amount about all of the efforts that you have going on, and this will not be the end of our discussions, certainly. So we look forward to more conversations. Appreciate your time today, and we'll go ahead and ring off then. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hagone, be well.
Thank you all. Hagone.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.